The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath when 8-year-old Noah quietly slipped his hand into his mother's and stared at the floor. Hundreds of eyes followed him as he entered the charity dinner beside his mother, Rebecca Hale, one of the youngest CEOs in Chicago. Rebecca was known across the country for building a billion-dollar healthcare company from nothing. She could command boardrooms, negotiate impossible deals, and stand confidently in front of thousands. But that night, despite the designer gown and flashing cameras, she looked more vulnerable than anyone in the room, because beside her stood the one person she could never protect from every pain. Her son had never spoken a single word. Imagine being a parent who would trade every achievement, every dollar, and every success just to hear your child say, "Mom," one time. What if you were in Rebecca's place? Would all the trophies and headlines still matter? For years, Rebecca had carried that quiet heartbreak alone. Noah had lost his hearing after a severe illness when he was only a toddler. The doctors had tried everything. Specialists offered hope, then disappointment. Rebecca spent nights sleeping in hospital chairs and days pretending to be strong. As her company grew, so did her guilt. Every business victory felt strangely empty because the person she loved most still faced a world that often forgot how to understand him. The dinner that evening was supposed to celebrate community leaders and charitable work. Rebecca almost left Noah at home with a nanny. Large events made her son uncomfortable. People often smiled politely but quickly looked away when communication became difficult. Noah had grown used to being the quiet child in crowded rooms, yet something made Rebecca bring him anyway. Maybe she was tired of hiding her son from a world that needed to learn compassion. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Wealthy donors laughed over expensive meals. Business leaders exchanged cards and handshakes. Noah sat silently beside his mother, observing everything with curious blue eyes. Rebecca noticed the familiar pattern almost immediately. People greeted her warmly. Then they noticed Noah. Then came the awkwardness. A few guests attempted small gestures before moving on. Others simply smiled and returned to conversations they found easier. Noah lowered his eyes. Rebecca's heart broke a little more each time. Across the room sat a man named David Bennett. Unlike most guests, he wasn't a CEO or politician. He had been invited because of his work running a community youth center on Chicago's South Side. He was a single father raising a 10-year-old son after losing his wife in a car accident years earlier. Life had not been kind to David. There were months when he worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. There were nights when grief sat so heavily on his chest that sleep never came. But somehow hardship had given him something many wealthy people lacked. It had given him the ability to truly see others. While conversations buzzed around him, David noticed the little boy sitting quietly beside the famous CEO. He noticed the loneliness in his eyes. He noticed how he watched people instead of joining them. And he noticed something else. The way his hands occasionally moved when communicating with his mother. A memory stirred inside him. Years earlier, David's late wife had been a teacher at a school for deaf children. During their marriage, she had taught him American Sign Language. At the time, he learned it simply to support her passion. He never imagined it would matter years later. As dinner continued, Rebecca excused herself briefly to speak with event organizers near the stage. For a moment, Noah sat alone. Most people barely noticed. David did. He slowly walked across the ballroom. Several guests assumed he wanted to introduce himself to the famous CEO. Instead, he stopped beside the little boy. Noah looked up cautiously. Then, David smiled and gently raised his hands. The next few seconds changed everything. In fluent sign language, he asked a simple question. "How are you tonight?" Noah froze. His eyes widened. For a second, he seemed unsure whether he had understood correctly. Then something remarkable happened. A smile spread across his face so quickly and brightly that it seemed to light the entire room. He answered. David responded. And suddenly, the silent little boy who had spent the evening isolated became a child again. His hands moved excitedly. He talked about his favorite books. He talked about drawing pictures. He talked about the golden retriever he adored. He talked and talked and talked. For the first time that night, someone wasn't speaking around him. Someone was speaking to him. Rebecca turned from across the room and saw her son laughing. Actually laughing. The sight stopped her cold. For a moment, she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Then she noticed David's hands moving. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. The room around her disappeared. Business deals, investors, awards, cameras, none of it mattered. All she could see was her son finally feeling included. Rebecca quietly returned to the table and watched. Noah didn't even notice her. He was too busy sharing stories with someone who understood him. And somehow that made Rebecca cry even harder. Years of exhaustion, guilt, and fear suddenly surfaced. She had spent so much energy trying to help Noah fit into the hearing world that she forgot how powerful it was when the world simply met him where he already was. As the evening continued, David remained beside her son. Guests began noticing. Conversation slowed. People watched the joyful exchange unfolding in front of them. Many Many had never seen sign language before. What began as curiosity slowly became something deeper, perspective. They realized the child had never lacked a voice. The world had simply failed to listen. Later that evening, David shared a little of his story with Rebecca. He spoke about losing his wife, raising his son alone, and the difficult years that followed. Rebecca shared her own struggles as a mother, balancing impossible responsibilities. Neither expected to reveal so much, yet pain has a strange way of recognizing itself. By the end of the night, they felt less like strangers and more like two people who had survived storms no one else could fully understand. Before leaving, Noah tapped David's shoulder. He signed something that made him pause. Then his eyes became wet. Rebecca asked what her son had said. David smiled softly. Noah said this was the first fancy dinner where he didn't feel invisible. Rebecca could no longer hold back her tears. On the drive home, Noah rested his head against the car window with the peaceful expression of someone whose heart felt lighter. Rebecca glanced at her son through the rearview mirror. For years, she had prayed for miracles. She imagined miracles would arrive through doctors, treatments, or medical breakthroughs. Instead, one arrived through simple kindness. One man, one conversation, one decision to notice a child everyone else overlooked. Months later, Rebecca's company partnered with David's Youth Center to create programs supporting deaf children and their families across Illinois. What began with a brief encounter at a dinner eventually changed thousands of lives. But Rebecca never forgot the lesson she learned that night. The most powerful thing we can give another human being is not money, status, or success. It is the feeling that they matter, that they are seen, that they belong. And sometimes the smallest act of understanding can heal wounds that years of effort could never reach. As Noah grew older, he would remember many things about that evening. But most of all, he would remember the moment someone chose to learn his language before asking him to learn theirs. And that memory stayed with him long after the music ended and the lights went out.